It's 12:05 and I'm going to get them all up here now because I think we can breathe a little bit in a few minutes, but I want to kind of truck right along. Again, I reached out to all these people and they all said, sure, I'll drop what I'm doing. I'll get on a Zoom call. I'll talk all about this. And I literally couldn't be more encouraged about these ideas, about all the things that people are sharing, about the way that we can, as Jesse mentioned, how do we rub against these very real barriers? And I think that's what we've got people on this spotlight here. And again, this is not to like say they're beacons of how you should do this. These are all people that have all tried things and failed at things and hopefully maybe have a little bit of experience that we can share and spark more discussion, because clearly there's lots of people that are attending that have really great experience and ideas too. So if the chat is any indication, we will continue to have this great discussion. But again, their bios and all that stuff is in the program. We're not going to spend 30 minutes telling all of their achievements because there's so many, but we're going to kind of get to the root of it. So I've prepped them. We have like I know that we're not realistically going to get through more than like 4 questions. So we're just going to get through a couple of questions. We have Stuart Wood here, Gary Ansdell, Cynthia Pimentel, Koskela, Elizabeth Mitchell, and Gabriella Banzin here. And I want to ask all of them. So real quick, just tell us where you're, tuning in from and kind of what kind of interaction you have with the community music therapy world these days. Like, what is your interaction from that perspective? So, Stuart, why don't you kick us off for us?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for inviting me along. Um, uh, can I just say that you said just before we started that you wanted to kind of truck on and we could sort of stop for breath later.
Sure.
Uh, I'd love to stop for breath now for a second.
Good. You take charge. Let's do it.
Do you mind? Just in the unconference spirit.
Let's do it.
I mean, I'm not going to do a thing, but we've just heard 2 hours of extraordinary material from people that were really coming from depths of experience and heights of achievement. Let's put it like that. And I suddenly, now that you've given me this microphone, I'm like, oh, I'd love to not use it for like half a second. So I don't really know how to not waste people's time, and also waste people's time. So maybe if I just speak more slowly for a little bit and say less than I was planning to say. I live in a very rural part of southwest Scotland, and I moved there 6 years ago to live in a derelict pub, which is still derelict. But I and my partner needed some space for our art practice and some space to think. I'm cisgendered, I'm queer, I don't identify as having a disability. I recognize that I'm from a very privileged line of what I would consider to be European and British settler ancestors. And so there's a lot. Actually, the way I come to answer your question, the way I come to process community music therapy now, which I've not sort of said I was doing for several years actually, is that it's all in unpacking that and thinking about how whether, first of all, my prior 25 years of work has reflected a commitment to undoing my colonial heritage, and to what extent it does or doesn't, and then to think about what things have I said in the past that have landed well or badly, and what actions can I talk about. So I'll stop speaking there because hopefully I've given us a little bit of breathing time. But um, yeah, that's where my practice is right now. It's at trying to really engage with what uh, a serious consideration of what treatment means and doesn't mean, what expertise means and doesn't mean, what medical models do and don't do, what collaboration is and isn't, what authorship and ownership are and aren't. And that's the model I'm going to leave with you and turn my microphone off. Thank you for having me around.
I'm so glad that you just happened to be at the top left of my screen. And I decided to call you first because that was amazing. Yeah, I don't want to have any other things to say. Gabby, can you go next, please?
What was the question? I was just kind of taking that in.
I guess. Yeah.
Wait, was there a question?
Question was just kind of where are you located and how do you relate to like these ideas from today so far in your work?
I guess this is a very community way to answer, but I feel I'm just very much in like um shape shift mode all the time at this point in my life. Um we've been talking about roles. I'm in a lot of different roles right now with job and school. But I feel like approach wise, I'm kind of in this like fluid space where I'm kind of just open to anything and trying to figure out what feels like me the most.
How about let's pop it over to you, Cynthia?
Hi, everybody. My name is Cynthia Pimenta Cosquela. I am, my apologies for not being able to jump in on the amazing conversations earlier. I'm literally calling in from Boston in my vehicle because I'm jumping onto a group like around one. So just the nature of the job. My current role, well, before that, like I said, my name is Cynthia. My pronouns she, her, and I identify as first generation Mexican American. That's why I say y'all, because I'm actually born and raised in Texas. So, um, in case people are wondering, like the Southern hasn't really left me, even though I've been here 15 years in the New England area. I'm the clinical director for the Center for Music Therapy at Berkeley, and the way that I approach um, community music therapy is really just a returning to what's familiar. And so what's familiar to both really focusing my work with communities who have been historically marginalized and the way that health is approached within communities, which has been a tendency to be very collectivistic in nature, meaning that, there's a big emphasis on community and how each person plays a role in healing. And so returning to expand, and I'll get into more of it later, but returning to what's familiar, not just for me and my culture, but also within communities who have been navigating different experiences and challenges is a way of uplifting and elevating voices in a way that feels authentic. And so that's all I have to say for now. I'll pass it on. Thank you for having me, Chris.
So happy you're here. Elizabeth, go next for us.
Thanks, Chris, for such a warm invitation. And it's really an honor to be here. My name is Elizabeth, or Liz Mitchell, and I'm here in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, which from a North American perspective, important to acknowledge that this is the traditional homeland of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. My ancestry is largely British, and my family has been here for a number of generations. But also British settler on this land. I am in a full-time academic role right now. I have been for a few years now, but prior to that, I spent about 10 years in mental health treatment settings. And my role there was doing some kind of, I would say, music psychotherapy type work, and then also doing a lot of boundary challenging around finding spaces for community music therapy and community music types of work in those spaces. And I have found myself as a practitioner and now as a researcher always really interested in the intersections of music therapy with other fields. And so that continues to be the thing that gets me really excited. I really draw upon a lot of music-centered work. Yeah, Gary Ansdell is one of my music therapy heroes, as all of my students know, and I'm privileged to be on a panel with him. And right now, in terms of, I'm writing about community music therapy. I'm about to start a research project, and I'll be honest, as a relatively new full-time academic, just trying to figure out how to balance a full-time university role with doing the work. And I miss the clinical work a lot. And so I'm trying to just figure that out in my own life right now, so I can feel, still rooted in that type of work that brings me, a lot of fulfillment and joy. So thanks for allowing me to be here.
All right, Gary, that leaves you, I guess. So tell us.
Yeah, I guess I'm last. So thanks for letting me be here, Chris. It's also really nice to see some faces in the Matrix who I haven't seen for a long time. So that's really nice. I'm beaming in from the east of England. I'm in a medium-sized city now called Norwich, and it has the most beautiful, large medieval cathedral. This is an old city. So I'm kind of at the end of my career, and I'm morphing back into a regular musician. So I'm a deputy singer in the cathedral choir, and that gives me the greatest joy. So community music therapy, the funny thing is it's old hat to me, so when I very often invited, of course, to do the community music therapy pitch on people's courses, and I very often start talking to students as if it happened last year. There's this great new thing. And of course, as Brynjolf suggested, it was kind of late 90s, really, when it was developing in some contexts, yeah? And I remember having a conversation with Brynjolf and maybe some others around a glass of wine. We said, how long is this going to last? Yeah, and if it lasts too long, when are we going to blow it up? Because all concepts should be, discarded at some point, lest they get fixed, yeah? So I think we said at that point, 10 years would do. So we're 20 plus. So I think my question is probably, it's great, it's still there, but what's next, eh? That might be a good question. Given we are talking community music therapy, I still hold to a few very simple kind of slogans. One is that community music therapy, it's the can opener rather than the can, right? So it's great that it's not defined, it's what suits people in a particular place. It frees people as an idea, as a concept, from really thinking too concretely, thinking that they have the answer, thinking they know what music therapy is, thinking they know what music is for people, what's best for me. But it's a freeing concept. So it's a can opener. Yep. Don't get too obsessed by the can. The other thing probably goes with that is the simplest slogan is follow where people and music lead. And they will. I think all of us have had that impression where, yes, of course, there are pressures for you to do what you should do and what people think they want and all that kind of thing. But actually, music is the most extraordinary thing for telling you where it needs to go and where people and music need to go. So the latest thing I did was working in elderly care in care homes. And again, I didn't call it community music therapy, but those principles of simply just going with where music is leading you. So that included for me doing online sessions with people in a care home, people with dementia. I thought it would absolutely never work during the COVID pandemic. And surprise, surprise, things happen. So things always happen if you trust music.
As promised, we sort of finished the preamble question and it's been 15 minutes. So I told you we wouldn't get through a lot. So I think, our first couple of questions, I think though, instead of going point by point, I'm going to read them all out. And I think I actually want to start with one of the last ones, but feel free to weave them all in whenever you have something. So the questions I prepped them with was, what ways have you found success in funding and creating partnerships for community music therapy centric experiences? And why did you choose those routes? I'll put these in the chat too. What type of documentation, metrics, and benchmarks have been most helpful for communicating these things to stakeholders and applying for grants? Oh, that's not going to copy and paste well into the chat. I'm going to have to do one at a time. And then tell us about a time you were eager for one of these projects and something totally flopped and failed, and the things that we learned from those things. I think it's easy for all of us to be like, to see all these people here that have written these books and shaped these conversations for me, and also remember that they've made mistakes just like I've made mistakes. And so what are some of those? And then the last one that I think is very relevant to the previous 2 hours, from a community music therapy and resource-oriented perspective and related, whatever ways our noggins wrap around these ideas, from whatever perspectives, what's been helpful for maintaining the integrity of the project? Of how do you keep that human focus while navigating the desires of the stakeholders? What reflexive processes do you engage in? How do you not worry or course correct when you're too worried about the numbers, the metrics, the clinical gains, the policies of the place that you work or that you're partnering with, and all of these things? So I just want to throw it out there to you all. I just threw those. I want whoever to pick up the ball with whatever is the most exciting first thing for you.
Chris, this is so hard. It's also exciting.
I know, but I talked to you before, and I know we will have to tell you, Cynthia, hold on, somebody else needs to talk too. So Cynthia, you're doing great things in Boston. How have you built this program around everything you're doing is community partnerships with marginalized groups?
Yeah, so I would start with say first is not me. My approach is really our approach within our team. And so a little bit of backstory, like as you mentioned, Chris, the Center for Music Therapy was really established to increase access and uplift communities who may not normally either have access to music therapy or have just not be in the place where music therapy is. And that's what led me actually to the center was, how do we really place equity at the forefront within our practice and really partner with community organizations within building therapeutic music supports. And so I think what really excites me and moves me about this work is the collaborative approach that we take both within our team. I wouldn't be able to do what we do without my amazing team, Brenda Ross and Joy Allen, who add all of their strengths and we combine them together. Brenda's our partnership guru. She knows the ins and out of all community engagement, really placing community's voices at the forefront. And also Joy, I love every time she talks, it's about impact, effectiveness, sustainability, and replicability. Those words are ingrained in my head. We're really thinking about how do we partner with communities in a way that's not us telling them what to do, but them really sharing with us how they use music in their everyday lives and taking that asset-based approach and integrating it within community music therapy. And so, with the strength-based model, it's really thinking about and not just thinking, but listening It's a lot of listening. I don't know what I'm doing when I first walk in there. They're like, oh, well, what, tell me what you do. What do y'all offer? What are the services? They're like, well, how do you use music? Actually, what are you looking for? What are some, what's the area of need that you're thinking of within the community? And we go from there. And so it's really a truly collaborative process that starts from listening and understanding and just asking a lot of questions, like how do you use music to support your health, and how do you use music in community? Even one of the projects that's really exciting for me is working within a high school for newly arrived immigrant folks. And these are young people who have already a very strong connection with music and healing. And, the first question I asked them was like, in a sticky note, because there was like 50 of them, tell me, ¿cómo usa la música para ti, tu bienestar? How do you use music in your health and wellness and everyday wellness practices? The answers were mi salida, mi respiro, mi aire. It's my breath, my escape, it's my curiosity in the world. It's how I get peace. These are all things that they shared the first time I meet them. And so, I consider this part of the assessment process, really understanding that when you're building any sort of programming, because this led to the development of a community music therapy programming that's centering how they use music, which guess what, folks? We do a lot of dancing. So for them, it's like, we, for a couple of students, they were like, we love to move and dance. And, when I dance, I forget everything. And so the only thing I think about is here. I'm not thinking about all the bad stuff that I've been through, and doing it as a community. And so, yes, it will look different than what's been traditionally, taught and shared in music therapy, but that's the exciting thing. It's really understanding that role of healing within these communities and partnering with them and elevating those voices who might not be heard. And so right now, in terms of how we collaborate with, the important piece as well as funding, we're very transparent with folks as well from the beginning. We are going to be, engaging together in partnerships. We'll see how it goes within our benchmark is a 6-month period. Then we assess, where are we? Is this beneficial? Do we need to adapt? Do we need to switch things up? If so, we'll do it. Is this even helpful for you? For some partnerships, it'd be like, actually, I was thinking more of this approach. And so it's our responsibility to switch that up. And so one of the things that we've been currently developing in that process is also metrics, but metrics where it's not just here's a survey, take it, we need this to provide information for our donors, but something that's meaningful to you. What do you want to measure? What do participants want to measure? And what's meaningful for them? And how do we integrate that in the practice? And that's really important. So asking those questions, how do you want to use music to support in your health? For these folks, for example, for the students in the high school, they're like, I want confidence, miss. I want to be able to go and like sing in front of people. I want to have a space to express my feelings. And so that informs not just our activities, which right now we are in the midst of a choir. That's what they want to do, a choir slash folk dancing pieces as well, but also in our outcome measures. So, tracking those feelings of confidence and tracking how, are we providing opportunities for you to really express your feelings in the way that feels true to you? And so this starts from, I guess, to summarize, from using their voices throughout the program development and collaboration with administration, with leadership. So buy-in has to be from the top too. There's so many times where you can go into communities, everybody's all excited for it. And then what happens in a couple months? But if you have administrators who are, taking the lead and they're like, we really want this is important to us, they're going to be collaborative in so many different ways, grant funding. And so that leads to sustainability. So, you know, really thinking from that asset base, community voices first. I shared that project that's meaningful to me. I think I covered most of the questions, but I want to end, if y'all took anything for this, who defines success? We believe that the community defines success within our practices. And it's their voices that matter.
What
the
a
most.
grand slam answer. And everybody's head was like, we were bobbleheads for a few minutes. Go ahead, Gary, please.
Yeah, I'll just say that when I read your questions, Chris, I had the as a kind of package. I thought, yeah, these make total sense. Of course, you know, they're rational, good questions to ask. But for me, the perspective that comes up, they're quite top-down questions. And of course, you know, very pragmatically, politically, of course they would be. Yeah, if you're in a position, funding, you know, people, credibility, all these things are kind of top-down issues. But I think it is worth saying, if we're seriously discussing community music therapy as the ethics of it, the kind of principles of it, it is a bottom-up process. Do you know that in a sense, everyone so far, Brynjulf and Kathy's things, all of it really comes down to saying, let's stop thinking just top down, that there are a set of, you know, experts, people who know what everyone else needs, and you can package that into a set of protocols, and you can manualize it, and then you can do an RCT to show that you've delivered on those, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a whole narrative that dominates health thinking, social thinking, and community music therapy is subversive to that, you know. And then, of course, doesn't mean you then become total hippie and throw everything out and saying, I'm just going to, you know, have nothing to do with top-down structures. But I think it's worth, in a sense, holding on to your values and your principles and saying, what is a way that we can reframe those kind of things, which doesn't start with top-down thinking. And I think just, you know, what Cynthia's talking about, a lot of hers was clearly, you know, bottom up and looking at top down at the same time. So it's probably, you know, I'm giving you something very unspecific, but I think the you know, the principle of this is quite important. That basically we should start bottom up.
No, I think that's perfect. And also Richie wrote in the chat, and if we want to kind of integrate this in as well, Richie said, I've enjoyed learning about everything so far, and it's a lot to take in. How do we take these ideas and incorporate them? And I think that's what you're hitting on right there, is like, and I think that's the hardest thing about talking about community music therapy too, is that sometimes I feel like I'm on Top Chef and I'm handing somebody a deconstructed hamburger. You know, it's like this it can be an abstract concept. So what do we do to move toward, you know, okay, these ideas are great. What does that mean for my personhood? You know, anybody that's sitting in here and thinking, what does that mean for deconstructing the way I think about things? What do you all have to say about those? Go ahead, Liz. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I can pick up, hopefully, that really great question, but also the points that Cynthia made about the being grounded in the needs of the community first and foremost, which for me is also so linked to what Gary said in his introduction around also following where music leads, because I think often our clients, you know, they are motivated to come to meet with us because of the music. It's not necessarily because of that like non-musical goal that someone else thought they should meet in music therapy, and that's why maybe they were referred. But they're motivated because they see the guitar on the stand or the drum kit or whatever, and they want to make music. And so, I mean, practically, I don't know if my experiences are relatable to everyone, because I will confess that in my 10 years of working in mental health facilities, I pretty much always had managers and administrators who were like so supportive of music therapy. So, and I know that that's not the reality. So I have done the practical frontline work. And I also have been really privileged to work in facilities that like understood the benefit of music therapy and directly reported to managers who supported me and the work. And I know that sometimes, contract kind of work in our settings is a lot more tenuous than that. So I'm coming from that place of feeling kind of secure in my employment. I mean, no, I don't mean right now in academia, but I mean like actually when I was practicing. But as an example of following where music leads, right when I started my first music therapy job, which was at an adolescent mental health facility, I was a young, new green therapist. I would have been like 25, I think. And kind of like what Kathy was saying earlier about the things you can do later on in your career versus, kind of how it feels when you're brand new. I think I always was really interested in community music therapy and in those intersections and pushing the boundaries of the field. And I also did feel that pressure to work in that more kind of the conventional or that consensus model as it, we know from the literature. But it was my clients so I'm doing that more traditional music therapy, and it was my clients that were like, hey, I want to perform. And even though I had this interest in that, the thing that prompted me to then kind of create a performance event at the facility was, multiple youth saying like, I want to share music with others. I would be in an improvisation with them thinking that, oh, there's like this like really insightful relational thing happening in this improvisation. And then afterwards they're like, hey, I want to do that again so I can like share it with my friend. And so like the meaning we're ascribing to the music is so different, and really coming to see music as first and foremost a social art form, rather than a private one. And so I think being really client-led and then going to my manager and saying, hey, like, can I start this thing? And can we like talk about the boundaries and the confidentiality in a mental health facility, but still like have an event where people can perform for one another? And again, privilege, like super supportive manager who was like able to just kind of was really happy to go with like, okay, Liz, like I trust you, so you can make this thing happen. But that was in 2007. I went to her with that question, and that performance event still runs to this day. And this isn't a not-for-profit. This is not. Well, I was going to make a joke. I hope the Norwegians are okay. This is not Norway, where music therapy is government funded. Like this is donor funded music therapy, where there's that pressure to support raise for the music therapist salary every year. But it was the youth that, in this facility who were the inspiration for that. And I don't want to take up, I mean, I can talk about the funding bits and the metrics and all that stuff, but I want to also just be conscious of sharing the space. So I'll stop there for now, and I can talk more about the practicalities of all that if you want.
Gabby, your face looks like you're thinking hard about stuff. What are you thinking about over there?
Okay. So, Liz, when you were saying that music like isn't a private thing, it's naturally social, that really reminded me of Gary, your book, where they're talking about like ripples and how like music kind of like expands like a pebble in like a pond. And so I was just kind of thinking about how your experience were like, Liz, your community kind of stuff just like happened in a more traditional, like structured setting, right? And for me, like I was thrown into a community center as my first job. Like I wasn't titled as a music therapist, even though my degree was in music therapy. And so I like wasn't they knew I was a music therapist, but I wasn't called music therapist. You know, I was like the uh, theater special needs theater director, and I had no idea how to do anything with theater, and I also don't like the term special needs. But that's what happened, and so I was forced to look at music therapy in a different way. And see how like the community interacted with music and how different, I guess, skills and techniques or approaches that we learned in school were applicable to what was needed, and applicable to connecting and like developing community. Um, I and I feel like that's kind of what's just happens to me every single place I've gone. Like I um have worked in more traditional like mental hospital settings, but I've also worked in a lot of community nonprofit organizations where I wasn't quote unquote the music therapist, but I was still utilizing like my skill set. So working at a nonprofit music school, or working at a theater, or working at a camp of some sort. Um, a lot of my experience in um, developing programs, community programs, has mostly been because I wasn't in like the actual like title role as a music therapist.
Everybody has already said the same thing, which I am going to cue over to you in a second, Stuart, too, because I think this relates directly to all your interests too. And interest is probably not even the right word, but yeah, taking the idea of like, that's what I love is like, I kind of had that feeling when I was like, what am I going to ask them? And I typed up some questions, and it's funny. It's like, oh, those are not unimportant, but maybe they're not the most important thing. And everybody's hitting on this idea of awareness and authenticity and active listening, and using that active listening not as a means of, coercing a situation, but as a true, like, how can we respond differently to what we are told about the power dynamic here of what is music, what is therapy, what are all of these other intersectionality things. And I think, Stuart, I think that's where I think we could toss over to you about, obviously you can steer the ship wherever you would like to go, so you can take this in any direction. But I also know that because you've spent so long thinking about all the things about participatory action in research and looking at the whole dimension of someone with your whole entire book and matrix of thinking about music therapy, what are you thinking about as it relates to what everybody is saying based on those kind of ideas?
About 10 years ago, Gary did a talk for an event I was running, and he talked about beginner's mind. And it was actually the first time I'd really come across the idea and the concept, and the famous quote from Suzuki about how in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, options, and in the expert's mind there are a few. It really named something for me, and was very comforting in relation to the terror I felt constantly about not knowing what was going to happen next. And I'm feeling it now because you've asked me an impossible question in front of 65 people. And so now I don't know. And I sit with it and I go, right, okay, apparently I've got this long experience and I don't know what to say next. However, I do want to talk about the last experience I had last year, last music therapy practical experience I had. where I, through a long story, managed to get funding in which I would go to a day center for people living with dementia and their families. And I managed to promise them, the funders, that I would provide no evidence about the value of music for people with dementia. I wouldn't record anything. I would provide no PR, and I wouldn't provide a solo authored report at the end of it. And I sat in the first gathering of 12 people with dementia, their carers, people identifying or not, varying different ways in terms of diagnosis and social status. I had no musical instruments and no idea what I was going to do. And in walked my co-leader, who was a staff member, with a record player, vinyl record player that she had been donated that day, and a stack of old vinyl records from somebody's attic that had been donated that morning. And so my mind went, oh, this is not what I thought it would be, but here's a thing. Let's see what this thing is. And half of me went, right, let's just see what this does. The other half went, right, name it. We're doing a vinyl cafe in the front part of a day center. So there's a thing, that's a thing. And at each step in this unfolding over 12 weeks, the moment I tried to name the thing we were doing, it sort of dissolved and vanished. So this gorgeous couple of weeks of people choosing vinyl records to talk about, and then that leading to conversations about music for a funeral, or music that they remember dancing to in the nightclubs in the 50s. Then that dissolved into them singing along to those songs as people started to bring instruments along. And then that dissolved into them improvising out of the records. And then that dissolved into us not playing the records at all, and us just improvising. And at each point, the moment I tried to name it and fix it, it went, no, poof. So that's my story.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick? Is that all right? All right.
I
So
agree
Stuart,
with
I resonate so
50%.
much. I was feeling everything you were saying, because I feel like in order to really, practice community music therapy, you have to be willing to go like this, like a squiggly line. So 'cause you really never know where it's going to lead, and you have to be incredibly flexible, when you're really listening to people and how they're using music. And it could look one way first 2 weeks, and then they're going to want to switch it up, but it builds on each other. Like, I was resonating what you're saying, Stuart, about, there are some weeks where, maybe folks need more of that, connection with like active music making, but then they want to like build on that. And I had an example, actually the opposite happened. So we were singing a song in Spanish with all the students. Were like, Miss, we love the song. It talks about love, but like not just that romantic love, but like all the types of love, like sister love, family love. I was like, oh, this is great. So let's sing it. So they were really excited. We started. It's for those that don't know, it's called Ocean by Carol G. Please check it out. Like it's a really, really good song in Spanish. So they're obsessed with it. We're singing it for a couple weeks, and then they're like, Miss, I'm tired of singing it. I really want to play those drums that we did at the beginning of the year. And so I was like, okay. So we got together, we're doing, an improvisation, group drumming. And then one of them's like, okay, Miss, I'm ready to go singing again. Let's go back to it. And so, then we have to switch it up, but I think really connecting it back to what, you were saying, Stuart. And I think, Gabby, you mentioned about how you're informed by sometimes roles, that look different, right? I think, I resonate with that as well, because I actually took a break, and I was a community health worker for actually 2 years, because I wanted to work specifically with immigrant folks. And so, I think that's where I really understood and got to learn more information about the real like power and role of music within this community healing context. And so, I think that helps inform, and also being flexible is incredibly important in this practice.
Yeah. One of the kind of teachery things I've said to students over the years is you can think of anything second, but you have to think of music first. Yeah. So whatever theory is fine, you know, whatever suits, whatever kind of policy stuff, but think musically first, because that will give you the lead, you know. So good old music-centered music therapist. I was just thinking, Chris, one of your questions was about things that go wrong. So I'm not going to talk about kind of a music therapy thing that went wrong, but just came into my mind then. To anyone else in the meeting knows there's a wonderful Keith Jarrett concert. I can't remember which concert, someone can probably know, but you know, he's doing one of those repetitive ostinatos, and it's going, and he's hitting this bass ostinato and keeps going, and then he just hits the wrong note, right? So his left hand hits the wrong bass note, and then as a listener you think, whoops, he hit the wrong note. But being a brilliant improviser, what does he do? The wrong note becomes the start of the next phase. It becomes the next ostinato. So that then leads into the next thing. So I just think it's, you know, what Cynthia says, what Stuart said about the unfolding of one thing leads to another. Again, we're talking bottom-up stuff, you know, and actually it's music that models that bottom-up stuff. If you do one note, another note follows, and then something else says. If you do one musical thing, you get a musical response, and then you get a third thing, you know? And the only thing you have to do is trust that the third thing follows from the second, and you don't know what the fourth thing is going to be, but something will happen. And even if nothing happens, that's a something, you know? I found a really nice quotation the other day by none other than Karl Marx. And he said, I'm not going to write cookbooks for the chefs of the future. I thought it was really nice. And that's when I kind of thought about the top-down questions. I thought, yeah, that's what we want to tell people today. Do you know, go off and invent your own recipe, you know, make your own souffle. Don't believe any experts. Don't believe community music therapy either, you know, it might mislead you.
I'm just trying to finish writing down this great Karl Marx quote. Thanks, Gary. I'm thinking about the flexibility that Gary and Cynthia are talking about, and not becoming, so wed just to community music therapy. And I love this idea of, you know, maybe throwing it out and what's next. And it made me think of something. I think there was a question that came up after Brynjolf's keynote this morning around, Brynjolf talks so beautifully about like not throwing away the individual needs with community music therapy. And so it's like a caveat to something I said earlier around like music being social, and which I do wholeheartedly believe. And that doesn't mean that community music therapy always means performance. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah. And then in terms of some of those like pragmatic questions that you asked, Chris, it made me think, being in a donor funded environment, there's this pressure to tell compelling stories, because compelling stories, I would say more than numbers, can bring in money, which then can fund music therapy. So that's really important to tell those stories, and hopefully from a place that's very client centered, and hopefully in the words of our clients, all of that. And I will say that attention, so this isn't maybe not something that flopped, but attention I found myself when I was working in donor funded programs, was that because community music therapy can be public, it lends itself well to these donor funded kind of, it's a beautiful story, right? To see a kid who's maybe involved in the criminal justice system or in the foster system get up and take that beautiful moving risk, and, you know, to sing a song on a stage. And that is so real and beautiful and visceral. And the tension there then is like, okay, so now we need to tell this story to the donor. And I will say that there was one time in particular where there was a tension around where I actually had to find myself back to arguing for the importance of the confidentiality of the therapy room, because there was like this pressure to have the kids perform because donors are coming through and we're going to like parade the donors through, and we want the kids to get on stage, right? So there's like a double-edgedness to the moving beauty of that performance thing. And I think, so again, to me, that just makes me think about the flexibility, and as Gary's saying, that music is first, and that client's musical needs come first, and that might be to be by themselves in that music making or be with that supportive therapist. And it might be to be on a stage, but that again, the client needs to come first, even when there are funding pressures, and that can be really hard in work environments, and I've definitely been there. So wanted to give voice to that.
We're coming up on the last couple of minutes, so I'm just wondering if everybody wants to take a quick, just like, I don't know, last second thought of, what I'm hearing is, again, what I kind of like exactly how we kicked it off too, Gary, of like, you're like, don't hold this thing either, the can opener, right? Don't hold the can on the pedestal either. And it's easy. We've made a whole day, a little symposium about this, right? Like, and it's not because we don't think that those values are important, because we think that they are. But when you go to the Karl Marx quote, the cookbook thing, it's like Stuart said, why name the thing? Like, who? That's the whole definition argument of like, let's not worry so much about putting a finger on that thing, or like what you're just saying too, Liz, of like, let's not worry about, like, as soon as we worry about, oh, now this is a thing where we perform at this thing and they do that, it's like you've put the cart before the horse. This is a totally different like thing now. It's not serving that purpose. Or like Cynthia said too, like it looked like it was going this way, and I have to trust that they said that it needs to go back this way, even though I'm like spinning around in a circle now doing a different thing. And I think it just ultimately goes to, it's not even, like you all are saying, it's not even about community music therapy. It's about being present and valuing people and doing that. So I'm just kind of wondering, as a last ping pong here, is to, if you feel like you want to say any, it doesn't have to be a bow. It can leave us with more questions than answers. But is there any kind of last thoughts that y'all would like to share related to this? Because I know some of y'all have been here all day. Cynthia's got to go to a session in like 2 minutes, I think. So what do y'all want to share?
It's about music, stupid.
Honoring people's lived experiences.
Oh.
You
I actually really like Jesse's quote that he put in the comments. Herbie Hancock spoke about how there are no wrong notes if they are responded to. If the rest of the band contextualizes the note, how wrong can it be? And I feel like band could also be synonymous with community. So if the community contextualizes the music, how wrong can it be?
I was thinking about that beautiful video that Bernie showed us earlier, and just that idea that even though it's about the music first, that also there are implications that couldn't have happened any other way. That like moment with that mother and that individual in that band who was singing his original songs, that music afforded that, and it was about the music, but so much else happened because of the music.
Going to be outrageous again, and
I was hoping so.
I'm not going to say anything except to give my gratitude to people, and I'm going to keep my mic open for about 10 seconds, and I'm not going to say anything.
The word that's resonating in my brain, y'all, is conjunto, which in Spanish is it's basically a word to describe a band that comes together. And I feel like this was it in so many different ways. So thanks, Chris, for forming our conjunto. I appreciate you and everybody here. It's a pleasure to meet y'all. And with that, I have to run. I'm so sorry. Bye, y'all.
Yeah, I think my last just thought for all of you all is I'm just also grateful for the fact that, again, I'm glad this conversation too went the way that it needed to go, regardless. There was no, again, all of this, I've trying to do the same thing as like, can I plan with loose hands because it'll be better when we don't force it, like you're saying, Stuart, like, oh, it's the Vinyl Cafe. Oh no, it's no longer the Vinyl Cafe. I think that's always how life is. Like, so I'm just grateful for you all's time. I'm grateful that I'm gonna shut up and step off the mic for a while. My friend Andrew is gonna take over and lead us through the community art gallery. So everybody, thank you for our panelists here.